And good afternoon. Make sure everything is working properly here. Looks like everything is good. So it's been a busy Sunday, and it is not morning, it is afternoon. But I thought I would share some things I'm working on and continued learning about automating PowerShell scripts to help maintain Nav Container Helper and Business Central containers. And it has been an interesting journey because PowerShell is pretty quirky. It has some, I'm just not used to it. It has some oddities compared to other programming languages like VB or C# or JavaScript or Java. And the syntax is a little weird. The way you do things is very different, and the way it behaves in certain situations seems oddly inconsistent to someone who's new to it. And I'm sure there's a explanation as to why it behaves in a certain manner, but just as someone who's walking into it, it is a very, I get some very strange results. And the answer might be, oh, that's just the way it is, or there maybe some explanation. But I am finding workarounds to see that, okay, the way I do things, if I try to do it this way, that's probably not so good or it's just plain wrong. And there are alternative ways of doing something that's the proper way. So let's take a look at that. So this started today when I realized that my Nav Container Helper task, I have a scheduled task that updates Nav Container Helper. That's great. It ran. It dutifully updated Nav Container Helper, but because I only have these 3 lines in the script being run, it updated it. I don't have email notification in there yet. I don't have any validation or anything in there. It updated it, and I assumed it updated, but I didn't know whether it changed a new version, whatever. And it turns out that in my environment, I ran into an error when Nav Container Helper got updated. So something about the new version my environment didn't like, or vice versa, and I started getting errors with Nav Container Helper once it updated to the new version 20 that I think came out yesterday or today. So I thought, okay, that's not good. Maybe I should add email notification to just confirm, hey, I've updated Nav Container Helper. Great, I did that in my last script when my Business Central container is rebuilt. I can send out an email. I know how to do that now in PowerShell. And why don't I add version detection? So if this script detects that I already have the latest version of Nav Container Helper, don't bother trying to update it. And now, internally, I believe the install module has a check to see if the version's the same, I think. But you'll notice in this script here, I'm not even checking. I'm just doing an uninstall and then an install. I'm not doing an update because I want to avoid having multiple versions. So maybe I could do a check in there. Do I have multiple versions installed? If so, then uninstall old versions. And if I want to update, then I can update to the latest version or skip it. So that's the concept behind this. So maybe I'll do a version check before I run the update. And if it's already on the latest version, then just leave it. And if I have multiple versions, then clean those old ones out. And then if it does update, include the old version and the new version in the email notification that gets sent off automatically, just so I know that the version changed from 19 to 20, etc. And then maybe I want to maintain the last so many versions. Maybe I don't always want to just clobber an existing version and upgrade. Maybe I want to maintain both version 19 and 20. So if version 20 gives me an error for some reason, I have version 19 sitting there, and I know I can always fall back. Now, as I've mentioned before, and I think videos or blog posts, I have encountered issues, actually in a blog post for sure, I've encountered issues when you have multiple versions of a module installed. When you run a PowerShell script that calls that module, sometimes I forget the logic, but it may randomly choose to run against the old version. So it's not a great idea based on my experience, at least with Nav Container Helper, to maintain multiple versions. So I don't know, but just a thought. So I was playing around with version parsing today, and I was going down one route. It was clearly the wrong route, but I noticed some really weird things about PowerShell in the process. So let's take a look and see. I'll show you what I was dealing with here. So here's an example of, let's say that I want to see which versions of Nav Container Helper I have installed. So let me make that, oh, it doesn't get bigger. So get installed module, Nav Container Helper. Come on. There we go. So this returns some text, multiple lines of text that says column headers, some dashes for the column separators, and then the values. So we have version, name, repository, description. And my version currently is 07020. Yesterday it was 19. It got updated last night or this morning automatically, and now it's 20. Well, how do I grab that version? Well, I thought, okay, this outputs several lines of text. I can store that output in a variable. I can then parse for the word nav container helper. That allows me to find that line. Once I have that line in a string, I can then do a split. I can parse out just the version number, and I can get the 0.7.0.20. Kind of the crude, low-tech, brute force parsing of text. Not pretty, but sometimes it's effective. So, okay, well, if I go here, I said, okay, if I do this, get installed module, I should get the same output. So I get those lines. I thought, well, okay, great. Let me store that in a variable called module info. And I assumed it would be a multi-line string. So I said, okay, call get installed module nav container helper, stored in module info, and then output that. Let's see what that looks like. When I do that, though, this is what I get. It's like, what is going on here? Oops, click the wrong button or press the wrong button. Let me try that again. F8. Okay, so when I store module info and then output it, I get this. Like, what is this? When I call get installed module nav container helper by itself, I get this. So why does this return this kind of nicely formatted string with 4 columns, but when I store it in a variable, I get this? I don't even know what this is. Is this JSON? Is it an array, multi-line array? I can't quite tell, but it's like a digest of information of all of the module properties almost. And I see, okay, there's our version, type module, description, author, company, and published date. And then there's the last few issues. It's like it's a build or release notes. So very odd. So I thought, okay, well, can I parse this? How does that work? And I messed around with that, was not very successful. So like, for example, when I tried this, I realized it wasn't working. So if I run this, I get this whole output. It's like, okay, that appears to be all stored in one line. And well, what if I try this? Now, this was interesting. I think Freddie shared this with me on a troubleshooting call. So it's like, interestingly, this returns a module object, let's say. I can then call module.version. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. So let me just comment this out really quick. And so very interesting. Calling the same get installed module rather than storing the output in a string, which is what I thought made sense here because it looks like it's outputting kind of text to the output window. Here, you return an object, and that object has properties, in this case, .version. And okay, well now I have kind of a more contained string with the build information. Maybe I could parse that. But no, that is apparently not the correct way. What you can do is you can do module.version to string. And rather than this kind of formatted display, I'm not quite sure what you call it, when you add to string onto that property, F8 again, magically you get this nice terse output 07020. Okay, I would have never figured that out. So my learning there is kind of look at someone else's code, look at nav container helper scripts and see how Freddie has done it in order to figure that out. So very interesting there. So that was get installed module, nav container helper, and I think I put these out of order. So this was the first test that I did, and then I figured out, oh, you put to string on the end, and it goes from this 3-line output to just a single line output there. So that's what that is, F8. So that's nice. But then I realized get installed module that has your module and properties and all this other stuff. Well, there's another property called FindModule, and I need to look up to see if it's effectively the same as get installed module, but you can do FindModule, nav container helper, version, .version, to string right in one line. So you don't have to get the module object and look at the version properties. This returns the module here, .version to string, and then you can get the latest version. So let's try that. Now that took a few seconds, but it returns the same value. Now, I'm now wondering, can I do this in one line? Since FindModule was able to do it in one line, what if I wrap this up Let's see if this works. So I'm going to try to grab the module version using get installed module and .version.toString. And I'm not entirely sure about the error action silently continue. Oh, I think that's if the module doesn't exist. What'll happen is if you don't have nav container helper installed, PowerShell kicks out an error, and it's like, a dozen lines of the red text. So I think that error action silently continue suppresses that. That's good to know. I've needed that. So, okay, so let's try this, see what happens. F8. Look at that. Now, one thing I'm noticing, notice here, there is one line of white space, whereas when I did these versions, it's no white space. Okay, so what if I say, let's try this. I'm just kind of curious if we are able to see white space or a carriage return. So I'm going to run that. Huh. Okay, looks like they're identical. Just for some reason, an extra line was output here. So here are two ways to do the exact same thing. In this case, just trying to get the version of a module. Get installed module dot version dot toString, find module dot version dot toString. And what I'm learning is that get installed module and find module return a module object. And PowerShell seems to be like VB script or VBA, where it is implicit typing. So I need to learn and remember that these return a module object, not like when I'm doing this, it's outputting this version information, but really what it's doing is it's implicitly returning the version information. What I'm really getting back is the full module object, and I need to navigate the properties such as .version, .toString in order to get the value I want. So, good to know. So now that I have that, I can get the value of my currently installed version. Now, how do I get the versions available from the repository? Like what is it? PS Gallery, is that what it's called? Yeah, so from the PS Gallery repository, how do I know what the latest version is? So to do that, I can look in the script called install-nav-container-helper.ps1. And that is what is run apparently by either nav container helper or I don't know how it's called, but Freddie told me to look here. And so this is get installed module. And so this is how he was able to do it. That returns your module. He's getting the version string here. And this is outputting the log. Oh, okay, it is already installed. Here's the version. And if it is latest, okay, find module. Okay, so interesting. So here I use get installed module. Here we used find module. Latest version. Oh, interesting. So maybe that is, I thought those are the same things, but they are potentially not. So this is what I have installed. Is this pulling from the repository? Let's see. So what if I do find module? Let's see if this works. All versions. Let me just Google. Yep, there we go. Look at that. So if I do PowerShell find module, look at that. Yeah, so finds modules in a repository. Okay, got it. So, wow, look at that. So get installed module, that's what I have. Find module, in this case, it implicitly gets the latest version. Returns an object for each module it finds. Okay, cool. So there's a gazillion versions out there in PS Gallery. And so what I could do is, come on, I could say installed version instead of module version. So here I have installed version, and let me get rid of these apostrophes. Okay, so I'm going to get my installed version using get installed module, and then latest version using find module, and then I'll say if installed version equals latest version you have the latest version installed. Ugh. One thing about, I was told you shouldn't use write host. And I read that write output is the proper thing to do in PowerShell, but write output, my experience is you can't concatenate in the output stream. You have to first create a variable to concatenate. And if you try to do it with write output, it'll output multiple lines, one for each item that is listed. So if you want to concatenate, you got to do it first, and then you have to send that composed variable to write output. Kind of annoying. Okay, so let's do that. And let's just write output. Okay. Else. Okay, let's do the same thing. A new version is available. You have version and the latest version is, okay, let's try that. So if I highlight this F8, okay, so let me just get rid of the word installed there. You have the latest version. So I have the latest version. Cool. Now, what if I just hack this and I say, okay, so I'm just going to intentionally have a different version. And a new version is available. You have this one, and the latest version is that. Cool. So now I can incorporate this into my scheduled task script, my nav container helper update script that will run nightly or every morning. And it can check, do you already have the latest version? Great. I'm not going to bother uninstalling and then reinstalling and potentially waste time, screw things up, whatever. And then if I do not have the latest version, I can have logic say, okay, proceed, uninstall, and then install the latest version. Perfect. And now that I have this version parsing logic and kind of learned how to do that, I can, I'm assuming, expand this to see, do I have multiple versions installed? If I do, I can clean up those older versions, make sure they're all gone, or maybe I want to have the last two versions. I can start to do version management. So that's pretty cool. And then I will use the same email notification script that I used in my BC container, my automatic BC container build script that I blogged about recently. And I'll use that email notification so that if I do a version update, I will send myself a notification, an email, and say, hey, I have updated from version 19 to 20. Go check it out, make sure everything works. And I also learned from Freddie that I can choose to install a different version if I want. So I'm going to look into that. So for instance, this morning, I ran into an error with the latest version 20. And so my nav container helper was unable to build a new named image and a new container. So in that case, if it is due to some regression error or something that breaks in a new version, I can roll back to version 20. So I want to look into how to do that. I'm sure it's just a version parameter off of InstallModule, but something I want to check out. So there you go. Look at all these versions. Nav Container Helper is updated regularly. And so I need to figure out, okay, do I want to update? Oh, another thing. Maybe you don't want to update to the latest version. Freddie is making improvements and changes so fast. Maybe you want to hold off for 24, 48 hours or one version and you want to be one version behind or something like that. Or maybe you want to wait 2 or 3 versions. So now that I have this version parsing available, I can do that. So pretty cool. So that was good. And this kind of came about, I knew this was an issue, and why I think version parsing is important, because this is my BC container auto update script. So this is my scheduled task that automatically downloads the latest image and rebuilds my BC container. And this is a parsing hack. So what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if during the new BC container build process, I want to check what the generic OS image version is and see if it matches my current host OS version, specifically the build number, the last segment of the build. So if I type winver, I want to look at this 1339. So if I'm on 1339, I want to make sure the generic OS image is on 1339 and that they match. I don't know if it's my environment, I don't know if it's Docker Enterprise, but I've had 2 cases where if those don't match, the new BC container build fails and with a generic error. And I just learned if I have an exact match, everything works fine. So given that, I want to know what generic image I'm using, and I want to know what my host OS is, and I want to compare. So if my container OS build and my host OS version are not equal, we have a problem. And I include that as a warning in the email notification after the build. In order to get that, my first attempt was a really, really crude hack. What it does is it opens up the PowerShell transcript file that was generated as part of the new BC container build process, loads that file, does a pattern match looking for the line that contains container OS version. And then it grabs the location of where version is. It does this really ugly substring and split. Like, this is just like cringe for me, right? So I'm cringing. You should be cringing. Super ugly, super fragile. It does work, but this was just a prototype and a test so I could get it done. That's my container OS build. And then I found this nifty trick that PowerShell can get the OS version and then this UBR, I don't know what that means. That is basically the specific build number for my OS version. And then I can do this parsing and check. So now I know, well, rather than me parsing the transcript file, it would be much better for me to go over here and do a Docker PS, actually it's Docker images -a, and presumably there is a proper way. I'm not going to parse this information. Hopefully, maybe I'll have to, I don't know. But I will get the output of Docker images, find maybe I key on Dynamics Nav, I'm not sure, and I will get this build number. And I want to see this 1339, whatever this build number is, somehow I'll parse that. And maybe it's in metadata, or maybe it's a .version property. But this image, I want to get the version info for this generic OS image, or this generic image in Docker, compare it to mine, and do it that way. I think that's probably the better method than this hokey transcript file parsing. And I'll look into how to do that. I need to figure out, okay, what if I have multiple images? How do I determine which image is the one I want to look at? The generic image, maybe it's the word generic. What if I have multiple generic images? Get the latest one, presumably. And then from there, I need to figure out, okay, how do I get that specific build number? So all of this is to say that, where am I? All of this is to say that PowerShell, version parsing in PowerShell seems to be kind of important. Seems like something I need to know how to do, and it seems like it could be of value in many situations when you're trying to automate something you're going to have to do version detection and comparisons. And it's good to know, okay, what's the best way to get these versions? Is it parsing text like this? Hopefully not. Hopefully you can do objects and properties and do object.version number, toString, whatever's necessary to get the specific version or build or whatever the case is. So that's part of the journey that I'm on working with PowerShell. And yeah, hope that was interesting. And if you have any tips about version parsing and figuring out different builds and version numbers in PowerShell, I'm all ears. It looks like there's a whole bunch of ways to do it, whether you're dealing with containers or modules or the OS. And I see people sometimes use PowerShell specific things. Sometimes they use .NET references, and I'm kind of leery of mixing those. If there's a native PowerShell method, I'm inclined to want to go that route so that I don't introduce another complexity with .NET libraries in the mix. But let me know what type of version parsing you've been doing. Okay, have a good one.